Okay, Kyle, why don't you tell us where we're at today?
Mike, we are at Old Bethel Baptist Church, which you see behind me. We're about 1.5 miles from Jackson, and I thought today would be a great day to come out and talk about the function of religion on the frontier. I think it's important to understand that where we are now here in Jackson, this was not always America. This was at one time a French territory, it was Spanish territory, and then it was French again, all the way up until 1803. And the interesting thing about that is American settlers pushed ever westward. They come to the Mississippi River, and across the river in Missouri, it's foreign land. But it's the lure of land that's going to force those settlers to cross anyway. And Don Louis Lorimer, he was the commandant of the territory for the Spanish, and he was under the control of the Spanish government down in New Orleans, and his job was to have settlers come in, but at the same token, they had to be Catholic. They could not be Protestant. And most American settlers were, at that time, tending to be of the Protestant faith, one denomination or another, whether it be Baptist, as in here at Bethel, or Methodist, as in we'll see at McKendree Chapel a little later. But the thing was, they could not worship openly. Lorimer, I don't think, cared enough to enforce the must-be Catholic religion. But at the same token, you couldn't build a place of worship because at that point it's really hard to deny that they're openly worshiping as Protestants. So the early American settlers who came here settled in the early 1800s. Jackson, of course, wasn't established till 1814, but people were living here. And they worshiped in private, they worshiped in their own homes. And 1803, that all changed with the Louisiana Purchase. With the Louisiana Purchase, this became American territory, and all of a sudden we start to see people wanting to worship openly, and I think that's a big key. Here at Old Bethel, the first Protestant church west of the Mississippi is going to be established. This is Old Bethel. And Bethel was a Baptist church established at that time, and it will become a very successful church. It is a log cabin, sure, but at the same token, it had a lot of parishioners coming from the area. And eventually, Bethel is going to send out missionaries to other communities in the area, and they're going to spawn off 9 daughter churches. These 9 daughter churches are helping to spread the Baptist faith in the communities where they are in Missouri, but ultimately only one has survived, and that's First Baptist Church of Jackson. It still survives today as a Baptist church. Bethel here has a large membership all the way through the 1800s until we get to the Civil War. And at that point, like many organizations, like many institutions, it's going to be torn apart by the Civil War itself. A lot of the people who originally settled here, and some of the people buried here, owned slaves. Yet other parishioners did not, and they were firmly in the belief that there should be no slavery. So what we see is this church dividing in the late 1800s, splitting apart, and eventually this church is sold for the lumber itself. These log beams are going to be sold to a local farmer. He's going to use some to construct a chicken coop. The rest are going to lay in a barn for over 100 years. And I think that's a really cool thing, is that eventually in the early 2000s, this timber is rediscovered. People realize what it is, and they begin to reconstruct Old Bethel Baptist Church that you see behind me. And I think it's really interesting that we're preserving this structure to show that religion on the frontier serves a lot of purposes. If you think about it, any major events, people are going to seek comfort in what they are accustomed to, and religion is one of those things. Living on the frontier, it's a very hard life. And the early settlers are going to want that comfort of community, of talking to other farmers perhaps, or other local people to see if they're facing the same dangers, the same hardships. And so religion becomes a very big part of that, especially here in the wilds of Missouri, if you will, on the frontier. The other thing I think is interesting about religion in the frontier area is the social aspect. You didn't show up for church at 9 o'clock, spend an hour, and then go home. Remember, there are no automobiles. These people are walking miles to get here. So if they're going to be here, they're going to be here for the bigger part of the day. There was probably a meal after services, and maybe services even after that. But it's also a time of socialization. Farmers talking to each other about crops, perhaps trading crops. You have housewives talking about cooking, talking about family life, talking about local gossip perhaps. The men are doing the same thing. Children are playing. This is a great opportunity for teens to meet each other. And of course, potential future spouses could be arranged here at the church as well. So the social aspect, I think, is a really huge part of that. And Bethel is going to help fulfill that particular need.
Tell me about the cemetery, Kyle.
The cemetery. We know that there are 57 stones located throughout the cemetery. Some are marked as unknown because a lot of the stones have been broken over the years. And when this was restored in the early 2000s, they did their best to put the stones back. And we have several stones that are really pretty interesting. And the first three I'm going to show you actually are Revolutionary War soldiers. So yes, here in Jackson, established 1814, we have 3 Revolutionary War soldiers buried here. Obviously, they are going to be relocating here after the war. Sometime after the war. And again, it's about that promise of free land that Missouri held for them at that time. We have Enos Randall. He was from North Carolina. The Randall family was a large family that lived in the Jackson, Cape Girardeau area. Robert Wicker from South Carolina. We had a lot of Carolinians who migrated to this area. Seemed to be kind of the major highway was out of North and South Carolina through Tennessee, Illinois, and then into Missouri. And the final one is Ithamar Hubble. He's a New Yorker. And the interesting thing about Ithamar Hubble out of New York is that he started as a teenager. Working for the Continental Army as a spy, essentially. And so here is this young man risking everything because being caught as a spy at that time was a death penalty for his beliefs in a new country. And after the war, he's going to come and he's going to be one of the early settlers to this area. In fact, Hubble Creek that runs through the center of Jackson is named for him. He settled on that creek a little bit to the south, and established a mill there. And so that creek still to this day bears his name. The other people buried here are some of the earliest parishioners. There are also 3 slaves buried on this property. We know of one, Dick Green. He was 103 years old at his death. He one time was asking to be baptized. His master refused his request and told the priest to go ahead and do it anyway. And the minister said, well, your master said I couldn't do it. Aren't you going to get in trouble? And Dick Green said, I have 2 masters and one's just a little bit more important than the other. And I think it's that determination, that grit, if you will, that really makes everybody here that important, because they are showing that religion is important to them no matter where they are, no matter the hardships they face. Whatever is denied to them, religion is an important piece. And I think that's a big piece of what Bethel and McKendree Chapel are all about, is people persevering in the face of adversity, and they find that inner strength through their religion and the sense of community they get from the area.
Okay, Kyle, where we at seems like it looks real similar to where we just came from.
It does, Mike. It looks very similar to Old Bethel, where we just talked about religion on the frontier and the social aspect that religion provided. And if you look behind me, you can see Old McKendree Chapel. And very quickly, the similarities are very striking. They're both log cabin structures. They're both Protestant churches. They both have been through some extensive renovation. They both are covered with a metal pavilion. So yeah, it's very, very similar. There's a couple of differences here though that I would like to talk about as we go up through the lawn here. And we're going to look at the front of the chapel. I'd like to talk about Methodism, a little bit different from its cousin, the Baptist Protestant faith. Here they It's all about the camp meeting and the circuit riders. And what is meant by that is Methodism had a large revival component, which was very important. And it also, with the circuit riders, oftentimes it was not the most wealthy. And so there would be a church here, a church 20 miles away, a church 30 miles away, but there would only be one preacher. And they would then travel a circuit every month. And so, you know, the minister may only be here in residence once a month or once every 5 weeks or whatever the schedule and the number of churches allowed. And I think that really sets it apart from a lot of other things. So it makes it a little bit different. But this is Old McKendree, and named after William McKendree. He was the first American-born bishop of the Methodist Church. He actually traveled through Missouri in 1818. And in 1819, this church is going to be built and named kind of after him. And I think that's kind of significant. We're given a nod to the Methodist faith there. And this is really the oldest Protestant church west of the Mississippi. We said that at Bethel a while ago, but if you'll remember, they tore Bethel down. And Bethel was not in existence for over 100 years. Meanwhile, this church has remained intact, on site. Yes, it too has had a lot of restoration work. It's got concrete pads out here. It's got the pavilion. Obviously, this is a work of love too, just like Bethel. But it's been here since 1819. So for almost 200 years, this has served as a center of religion for the area. It's a center of social congregation, like we talked about before. Imagine a camp meeting, which was really big for the Methodists. People from all over the area and from other states came here. They would camp out here on the lawns, on the property, and they would have revivals then. So yes, it's here for a religious purpose, but then they're also here for that social aspect of the camp meeting too, because this would last a week. And so I think that's really important to understand. That social aspect, just like we talked about at Bethel, is really important too. The other thing I would say is, again, we're only about 2 miles from Uptown Jackson. So the similarity is very similar to that at Bethel as well. And I think you really see that coming through. And I just find that really cool. The other thing is really cool is, if we look over here, the construction of McKendree Chapel, frankly, is amazing. I find it really cool because if we look at these logs, first of all, look at their size, especially up high. We're talking beams that are 40 feet long. We are talking about beams that are, 2 foot thick. These are significant trees. This is old growth timber. And again, this church is built in 1819. So imagine the construction process. We don't have cranes. We don't have highboys and jack lifts and whatever. We're pulling these logs probably off the property. We are pulling these logs by horse or mule teams. They're being hoisted into place by block and tackle, pulley systems. So this is a lot of hard labor construction. And I think that's really pretty significant. You'll also notice one difference here is we have 2 windows. We actually have 4 windows, 2 per side. Unlike Bethel, they had windows available here, but that also shows the date. Remember, Bethel predates this church. It was built in 1806. This is 1819. So by 1819, you can see the spread the civilization has, that we have available window panes for the church. The other cool thing, the adze marks, the hand-hewn logs of this chapel. We could see this at Bethel a little bit, but here they're very predominant. You can really get the idea that this is a hand-built church. Yes, it has been restored. They've got masonry in here for the chinking today, but still very, very cool old craftsmanship that I think we see here on the frontier, the wilds of Missouri in the early 1800s. One last thing to really look at here is the chimney. And as we look at the chimney, we start here at the base and we have some very huge rocks. And as you go up, you notice rocks are also of very large size. So again, these craftspeople have a dedication to their faith, put forth the work to be able to build a chapel that's going to last 200 years. And you see that on these rocks. They're very large. This is a labor of love. This is a huge undertaking. We're filming this in late August of 2019, and this church was built in 1819. So we are celebrating the 200th anniversary of this church. If you saw some of the workers in the background, they are preparing for a very large celebration held in conjunction with Southeast Missouri State University. They are trying to prepare the premises for an expected large number of people to come out and celebrate 200 years of Methodism here in Southeast Missouri. And I think you can go to their website, which will be attached in the description below. They also have a very well-produced video about the history of Old McKendree. And so I would encourage you to come check out the history in your backyard. Remember, we're only a few miles from Jackson here, 2 miles. So 5 minutes away, you can come and see two very historic sites dealing with the function of religion on the American frontier. Both are well preserved. Both have been kept up by people who really believe in the idea of what these churches symbolize. So again, you don't have to be on a great battlefield or in New York or Washington, D.C. to see history. It happens in your backyard.